if I just raise 20 million bucks for it for my VC backed company, I can at least go out, I would think, and afford to hire the best people or at least top 10%. So I don't know
Yes.
what the going rate is for a software developer or whatever, but presuming the range is six figures to seven figure or whatever that range is it best practice to have fewer people at the very top end? Is that better ROI?
Yeah, great question. From my angle, it is because bad people can end up costing you more than they make you in this scenario.
Mm.
From like somebody that raised just $20 million, probably not, because they are going to try to deploy as much as that capital as they can, and most likely it's going to be in talent, right? Talent acquisition. Um, and yeah, I mean that's a different scenario, right? Because their whole mission is to spend all that money, burn through it, get traction, maybe at a loss, right? Probably at a loss until their next round. Um, so to some degree, it doesn't matter as much for them. And as far as hey, I need just three guys that are awesome. Everybody has this idea of like a 10x developer, right? Again, I have yet to see that. But I guess maybe that's the difference: the VC versus the bootstrap guy. I would opt for three guys that are just unbelievable versus 100 guys that 10 of them are good and